Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday. I gotta do this carefully. Monday, January 2nd, 2023. All right, we got the first one out of the way correctly. Very good. Welcome back. Happy New Year to all the people who believe in the Gregorian calendar. And, it's there. There's no reason not to believe in it. So, let's get going with the first sound check. We'll do the first sound check. I just got that as I'm saying this, Justice's sound check pops up. First sound check of 2023. We're doing it live on the air here today. All right, everything appears to be working. This is the way we usually do things anyway. By the way, no change in regular occurrences. If you thought that this was the case, I just haven't spent any time collecting the stories yet, but our good friend SFDB very frequently does. Yes, people were accidentally shot by celebratory gunfire during the fireworks, or sometimes no fireworks at all happening on New Year's Eve. People just count down, and I guess they figure, well, you're supposed to make noise of some kind at the arrival of the new year, some celebratory noise. I'm not really even certain why that has to happen, but it does. And if the horns and little confetti poppers and bells and other things aren't enough for you, well, I don't know. Americans frequently think, what I'll do is fire my guns into the air because they make bang bang noises, and that's cool. And, well, people forget about the whole gravity thing. The bullets come back to Earth, et cetera, et cetera. And every year, July 4th and New Year's is the celebratory gunfire wounding season, and no change in that status. This one from, you'll never believe it, Texas. It's unbelievable. Who would have guessed that Texas would have such a problem? The Fort Worth Star-Telegram reports, stray bullet hurts boy watching New Year's Day fireworks in Arlington, police say. And police are right about that. Archibald Brown reporting for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. I don't know. Do we read you the whole thing? Do you want to know exactly where the kid was? A boy was sent to the hospital after being hit by a stray bullet while watching fireworks with his family early New Year's Day, Arlington police say. Kid should be at home and in bed, but, New Year's Eve. Police and paramedics were sent to the 200 block of Roberts Circle, in case you were looking for the exact location, around 12:20 a.m. to investigate a shooting. They found a juvenile with a gunshot wound and transported him to the hospital. The boy's family had told police they went outside. You'll never believe how this happened. They went outside with the boy to watch fireworks nearby when he was hit by the stray bullet. Now, by the way, I say that the kid should be home in bed. I don't know how old the kids are, and sometimes you want to let them stay up for New Year's Eve, and they're off from school the next day, et cetera, et cetera. So, not the worst thing in the world. And if you thought that having them home in bed was any safer, for that matter, not when there's celebratory gunfire going on. I haven't seen any this morning, but there's no shortage of stories about those stray bullets just coming down through people's roofs and being found in the bedrooms inside. Usually just about as many stories of people actually being hit by bullets as actual people having actual near misses and the bullets coming through their homes. So, could we stop this? Would this not be a bad idea? If bullets, every once in a while when somebody suggests that if we can't have gun control, we ought to have bullet control, raise the price of the bullets to, $1,000 a piece, that would at least encourage people to stop wasting ammunition on celebratory gunfire. So many cheaper ways of making noise, some of which is actually fun and cool. And I don't know why everybody sort of thinks that celebrating as if you were Yosemite Sam is the way to do it. I don't know. Anyway, and Yosemite Sam very frequently, by the way, fired into the ground. If you actually take a look, I think at the actual footage, which is a cartoon, which is to say that it's not actual footage. Anyway, you get the idea. Try not to do that. I'm guessing that the instances of celebratory gunfire among the listening crowd here today probably pretty low. Yeah. Oh, and right. Justice Putnam. This is good investment advice from Justice, who says bulletproof roofs could be a growth industry. Of course, there is bulletproof glass, and that never really caught on with everybody. Everyone knows that it's there, and I suppose if you live in a really dangerous neighborhood, you might think about bulletproof glass. But if you could afford bulletproof glass, you probably wouldn't live in that dangerous neighborhood. Very frequently the case, unless you have a very unique situation like bulletproof glass because you live across the street from a gangster who you expect to be assassinated at some point. But, that's rare, I think. I mean, sure, it happened in my family. But all right, other than that, no, it didn't happen very often. I don't even know if that actually happened, by the way. That does feel like family legend. I think the offer was made, bulletproof glass, for family members of mine, my great uncle, in fact, who lived across the street from a, old style, like the legendary, mafia 1950s style mafia mob figure, Longies Willman, the Jewish mobster who ran much of the northern New Jersey liquor trade during bootlegger days, etc., etc. And he lived on this lovely private road in West Orange, New Jersey, in a tremendous stone mansion that is still there, and you can still see on, I don't know if it's on Zillow or anything, but you can still spot it, of course, on Google Maps, because I've taken a look. And they lived across the street, and they were very pleasant neighbors. They kept the neighborhood safe. That was the excuse, you told yourself for allowing yourself to live across the street from someone like that. And I guess he made the offer of bulletproof glass. I don't know if they ever took them up on it. And it doesn't matter. They killed him in a way that was very pleasant and quiet for the neighbors and didn't hurt anybody. So keep your bullets in check. That's all. It's a good way to start any new year. It's a good reminder, and it's applicable in any new year, no matter what year it is and whether or not you remember to say that you're in the correct year or not. Greg Dworkin is here. He's in the correct year. That's good news. He's been collecting stories. Some of them actually happened already this year, which is remarkable because there hasn't been very much of it. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. So we got a lot of stuff to talk about.
Yeah.
Or at least we have some stuff to talk about.
Let's
or
just
maybe
keep
we
talking.
have something
How
to
about
talk
that?
about. I don't know. We'll find out at the end of the hour.
You're not allowed to stop until till 10. So let's go.
All right. Well, so starting with a process question here. And this has to do, I think it's something we talked about before. And this isn't a pop quiz for you. It's a pop quiz for me to see if I remember what you told me.
Oh, all right.
So we're going into the new year, and tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken, is January 3rd. And that's the day they were supposed to vote on who's the new speaker.
Yes.
And all the stories suggest that Kevin McCarthy doesn't have the votes yet. There was a letter from 9 people saying they weren't going to vote for him. He can't afford that many losses. Letter. There are no moderates on the House Republican side. There are center-right Republicans and there are hard-right Republicans. And the center-right Republicans want McCarthy because they don't want anybody more conservative than that. But they won't vote with Democrats.
Right.
So McCarthy's life is complicated. We don't really know who the speaker is going to be. We'll find out tomorrow.
Maybe.
He's, as of last night, had 2 things happen to advance process and policy and reality. One is that they've released their set of rules.
Okay, finally.
I didn't read it, but I hear last night one of the rules that they had is that if 5 people in the majority agree, then there can be a motion to vacate the chair.
5.
There has to be 5 votes, and it has to be the majority party. So I don't think the Democrats get to have a say in it.
No, I guess not. I mean, it makes a certain amount of sense in that they're the ones that elected the speaker, but 5 won't do them much good, I don't think. I think they can get these guys. If you get 1, you get 5. You know, if Murdery Trader Green is
I don't know what that means, but
all right.
The question on the table is, all right, so they're moving closer to having a speaker vote. That doesn't mean that they have a speaker. They may not have a speaker tomorrow. It may take a while. They may. But the question on the table for me is, so when do they actually take over, become the majority party? And from a practical point of view, when do the chairs of the committees get elected, and when do they put in place and actually start to have power? And so does that depend on the Rules Committee And then who appoints the rules committee? Is that in the new rules, which I don't know. That's my pop quiz, what I remember you told me.
Okay.
So the question on the table for you is so tell me again how these chairs actually start functioning as chairs.
Well, they would be appointed to, everybody gets their committee assignments. The process starts in the caucus or conference, right? The Republicans make up their minds about who they want in various positions, and they usually you have some idea of whether or not you're going to be the functioning majority, and they're supposed to have more people. So they'll go with the assumption that they're the majority. They'll write their lineups for the committees. They'll package them up. Democrats will do the same. The Democrats in this case, because they're the minority party, will send that list to the Republicans. They'll put together resolutions that they'll bring to the House floor. So that each party sort of makes its own lineup. And then what normally happens is Democrats, whoever's in charge, says, well, the other party has the right to name who the minority members are going to be. There are going to be fewer of them on every committee. We don't care who they are. This year, that may get screwed up because people are mad about Murdery Trader Green getting banned from committees last time. So we don't know how that's going to affect things. But normally, they just take the Democratic lineup, smash it together with the Republican lineup, including who the chairs are going to be, and put it forward in a resolution. Usually, not that many. They do a bunch of committees all at once. Not necessarily all of them in one single thing if they haven't worked stuff out. But 1, 2, possibly 3 resolutions brought in the opening days, usually the first day, because the speaker election is done. And they just, by resolution, it has to be done on the House floor. It's an official act of the House, not just a committee or a conference or caucus thing. It has to be ratified in the House. And then at that point, the committees can start functioning.
So
But,
rules committee,
when are they going to get to that?
do they
Yes.
have a role in this?
They don't have a role in it other than, I guess they could have a role in it in writing rules for the consideration of the resolutions that'll be brought to the floor. But usually, a resolution just comes on its own with a 1-hour debate. They don't really have a big role in this.
So it doesn't have to go through rules.
No, except for the rules package, which does go through rules.
So the rules package went through. But the committee selection of chairs doesn't necessarily have to go through. They
don't really need anything there. And usually, they usually don't have a rule for the consideration of a resolution. Since rules themselves are resolutions, it just comes to the floor with the automatic 1-hour debate to be divided between an opponent and a proponent of the resolution.
So there's no anticipated
much.
Delay.
Not from the Rules Committee.
In picking up who the chairs are going to be. Do they start voting before there's a speaker? What if there's no speaker?
No, normally no. They begin by selecting a speaker, and then the speaker begins presiding over this stuff. Although they accept the gavel, they give a speech, they hand it off to somebody else, the speaker pro tem. They start doing fundraising and drinking champagne with people, and somebody else then presides over the adoption of the rules package and any of the resolutions for committee assignments that are ready. The committee assignments occasionally are delayed. They sometimes will take a couple of days if they're still working out lineups, but they'll usually have the major committees ready to go and all lined up. Could they do it without a speaker? They could. They could take care of a lot of these things if they really needed to. If they could not come to a conclusion on the speaker, the clerk could continue to preside, and they could adopt some rules. They could move off of the speaker vote if they want. Adopt some rules, assign some committees. It doesn't really matter who the speaker is in terms of filling the committees, I wouldn't think. But
so the fact that there's no speaker is going to get everybody's attention.
Yeah.
But it's not really going to delay the so-called work, and you should put square quotes around that.
Yeah.
The so-called work of the Republican majority.
It shouldn't. I mean, there are ways that it comes into play, like if there's a dispute over who should chair a committee or how many people or which people should be on it. The speaker has a lot of influence about that. And if you're not the speaker or that no one can decide who the speaker is, there could be a lot of delays in filling the last slots or the chairmanship scope of certain committees, but for the most part, I think they all kind of know who's the senior Republican on this committee, who's the one expected
Right. I mean,
to take
for example,
over.
Intelligence Committee is going to be difficult because they want to get rid of Adam Schiff.
Yes.
And I don't know how they do that.
Right. Well, the one thing they could do, they could try, and I assume that they'll want to try to do this, and revenge, to whatever extent, for murdery Trader Green, Paul Gosar, etc. Those who got thrown off are going to say, let's throw Adam Schiff off. Let's throw, various others, Eric Swalwell off of these various committees for things that they, slights real and imagined. And that will require a slightly different vote, or that will require them to put forward a resolution that just doesn't include somebody that Democrats put in their lineup. And that will be controversial, but their party line votes, generally speaking, anyway. Mm-hmm. Although, when everything's working fine and it's just a matter of these are our committee assignments and these are yours, and we put them together, then people vote yes, kind of regardless of party. Sometimes it's just used as a party line vote, as taking attendance to see how things are going to go for the rest of the day.
The overall big picture, capital letters, I suppose, is that when a new Congress convenes, typically what happens is, from the media's point of view, and again, I'm not an expert on Congress, I just look at the media and see how they cover it. And so the media generally likes to write a whole bunch of stories about, things are in disarray, and then suddenly things get all resolved in the last hours, and there's really no delay, even though the media gave you the impression there might be, because things were so in disarray, except they're really not. There's a few arguments here or there, but they don't really hold up the so-called business, scare quotes, of the new majority. In this particular case, though, I just really don't know what the hell's going on. I don't know if anybody does.
It's very difficult. Well, all these things, you're right. There are usually things to resolve at the last minute, but they're resolved, if not behind closed doors, they're resolved out of sight of anybody who's not an insider. And if you don't care about such things, you won't be reading about it. You'll never see it on C-SPAN, and everything sort of falls into place kind of because it has to. Otherwise, it's a huge embarrassment. And then C-SPAN comes on and everything goes according to plan, and that's boring for most people and they don't watch. This time, now you really have to ask the question, well, what if you can't settle this question? Or what if there's no speaker to make the call in the final minutes so that everything goes smoothly when the cameras turn on? And you're in that situation now. So
let's turn to the gossip rags.
All right. Yeah.
Because, this is what they live for. It's a sort of gossip that really doesn't have anything to do with anything. So they have their sources, and this is Punchbowl. First, though, the fate of Kevin McCarthy must be decided, including whether he has the votes to become the next speaker. Right now, the answer is no, and the signs aren't good for the California Republican. There are between 5 to 10 House GOP lawmakers who may oppose McCarthy during Tuesday's speaker vote. That would be tomorrow. Even close allies privately worry it's hard to see a path for McCarthy to get to 18. But so much remains fluid, and no one can underestimate how difficult it is for a member to publicly vote against their party leader for speaker. Those are old rules. I think that's just silly. These people are nuts, and so precedent doesn't bind them in any way, shape, or form.
Yes. Well, yeah, they're crazy.
They're nuts.
Yeah. I wonder
you
how
can
much
find 6
it
of them
benefits.
who are so crazy that they don't really care about any of this stuff.
Yeah, no, they're there. We can tell you their names.
Yeah.
I wonder if Democrats have any interest in settling things early, even though no one loves McCarthy, but does
right. But for the good of the country, you really like some of this stuff to be settled. So it goes on to say, if McCarthy were to fall,
change it. Yeah.
It would represent a new level of chaos for House Republicans who've spent much of the last dozen years at war with the leadership of their party. Under this scenario, expect outright war between the middle of the conference and the 10 or so conservatives who blocked him from capturing the gavel. Here are the dynamics McCarthy faces, and they are troubling. Some House Republicans have personal gripes with McCarthy they're ever going to back him. That includes Bob Good and Matt Gaetz.
Okay.
There's other Republicans who believe the House hasn't operated properly for decades. This isn't new. And Chip Roy is there. I'm doing it for the good of the country.
Yeah, all right, sure.
And so on Sunday, McCarthy released a rules package for the 118th Congress. It's brimming with concessions to conservatives. In fact, the anti-McCarthy faction has won pretty much every change they sought, and they still refuse to back McCarthy.
All right.
That's why McCarthy's like such a spineless jellyfish.
Yeah.
He thinks somehow it's going to help him. And,
I'll make a deal with
if you're
him.
going to lose, you might as well lose with your backbone, for goodness sake.
I guess.
McCarthy walked Republicans through the package during a 4 p.m. call Sunday afternoon. Here's a summary sheet and section-by-section analysis. I didn't look at it. If you're interested, Punchbowl has it. Most notably, McCarthy's reverse direction on his vow that he'd never change the motion to vacate. He also released a letter indicating he's striving for ideological balance on committees, and that means you'll see some conservatives on prime panels such as Appropriations, Ways and Means, and Financial Services.
That's balance?
That's bad.
What's the balance part?
If you put people like Marjorie Taylor Greene on Ways and Means, that's bad. If you put Paul Gosar in Appropriations, that's bad.
All right. I mean, I guess ideological balance means insane lunatics have not lately had representation in major important committees, but now they will.
And
That's
usually you keep them off important stuff, but that rule's changing.
Great.
Call it the McCarthy rule. Other big changes include no more proxy voting, no virtual or hybrid committees. Magnetometers will be removed. So now, the insurrectionists can bring their guns with them.
Yep.
And despite all that, 9 House Republicans released a letter Sunday saying they don't like him.
Yeah,
Scott Perry.
Sure.
But
Why
also
would
Andy
anyone
Ogles,
like him?
Tennessee, Anna Paula Luna, Florida.
Anna
These
Paula
are people
Luna.
you wouldn't necessarily expect to have signed an anti-McCarthy letter, but they did. And so there's long been a pocket of hardcore opponents, but he's got other people that various and sundry reasons don't like him.
Okay. I mean, I don't like him.
My money's still on Scalise, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we'll see. I should remind everybody, I think maybe the way to, I don't know whether Democrats have any interest in doing this, or maybe they just, when they get tired of having that many ballots and they want to just settle things, I assume they'd rather, in the end, have McCarthy than roll the dice and see what Republicans come up with. But I guess they could start absenting themselves from the vote. It is still a majority of those present and voting that are necessary, not those sworn in. So they don't have to get to 218. They could, if enough Democrats just go out for pizza, so such that whoever McCarthy can cobble together minus these 9 still represent a majority of those present and voting, then he's speaker. So I guess eventually they may want to do that, and I guess they'll show up, cast a vote for. I presume they'll nominate Hakeem Jeffries for speaker. They'll cast that vote because it's kind of a historic vote, and then say, if Republicans throw us into chaos because they can't put together a majority for their guy on the first ballot, fine. We'll cast a historic first vote for the first African American for speaker, and then after we've sufficiently embarrassed them on television, we'll go out for bowling and pizza, and they'll.
So that 7 can elect.
Yeah.
So this is
my guess.
the competition for Punch Bowl as a political playbook in the morning. The way they put it is on Sunday evening, McCarthy announced on a private conference call that he'd give his antagonists one of their top demands, the threshold to trigger a vote ousting a speaker would shrink from half the GOP conference to 5 dissatisfied lawmakers.
Okay. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Gates, Gosar, Biggs, Anna Paula Luna, what was her name? That was a fantastic name.
And Chip Roy.
There you go. 5. Done.
But hours later, a group of 9 House conservatives issued a letter saying it's not good enough. That, in addition to the 5 Never Kevins, who have already declared they're opposing McCarthy. Remember, he can lose only 4 votes.
Yes, okay. Well, we think so.
But this morning, we can report that that's not even the worst of it. We caught up Sunday with one of the GOP fence sitters, and he told us that some of these undecided members won't support McCarthy even if he gives them everything they want. The problem is people don't trust him, and a number won't vote for him. I wonder why they wouldn't trust him.
Oh.
Can you imagine not trusting Kevin McCarthy?
He seems like a fine fellow.
Yes, who always keeps his word.
Yes. Well, all right.
Even under pressure.
Yeah. This is what's really funny, of course, is that I don't know, maybe this is part of the Democratic calculus here too. Let's watch McCarthy concede on every stupid possible demand, still not make it,
Yes.
And then
that's
we'll make
exactly
him
what's
speaker
happening.
anyway by leaving, and then they'll be stuck with him. Then the weirdos won't get their chance to nominate anybody. I guess they could nominate somebody, but they won't be able to install anybody. It'll be Kevin McCarthy. He'll have no control over anything. We'll come back from pizza. We'll have had pizza.
Well, he
That's
won't be
a plus.
speaker long. It'll be a Paul Ryan scenario, except much faster. A John Boehner scenario, but much faster. The problem is people don't trust McCarthy, and a number won't vote for him. These are just the facts, said a lawmaker who was giving inside info to Politico. The list of demands we offered was not for guaranteed support, the kinds of things that might move some of his detractors. And that's a huge issue for McCarthy. One his allies told us days ago they're worried about. McCarthy keeps dodging questions from his own rank and file about whether his proposed motion to vacate would even get him the votes. It won't, as the missive from the 9 conservatives demonstrated Sunday night, and it's unclear what more McCarthy can give them to change their minds before voting begins. This well-placed source also told us McCarthy's doubters are preparing to deflect blame for the morass onto the GOP leader himself. McCarthy's strategy is squeezing the holdouts with attacks from high-profile conservatives have backfired. The threats were not credible. Pressuring people and threatening people is never a good idea. The doubters are already talking to GOP centrists about a unity candidate. McCarthy allies insist, despite it all, he's going to get there. And we don't know that. So, again, it's a complete and total mess. And that's why I was preliminarily asking you the questions about if this doesn't get resolved, what's the time frame for moving forward?
Yeah.
Sounds like they can move forward on some things, but there's a lot of stuff they can't.
Yeah, that's true. And like I said, the thing to keep in mind is, if enough people absent themselves, Democrats can change the outcome by leaving, and unless everyone starts abandoning McCarthy, they have to leave in time before everyone starts looking for a different candidate, I guess. They can still install him, and that's just, he can't do much, but they'll have the same problem on the rules package, too. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We continue with our discussion of the chaos to come starting tomorrow in the House. And now, it just occurs to me that the one source that everybody can turn to watch is going to be like the main chaos agent. Now that I think about it, is so C-SPAN will cover all the proceedings, and they won't tell the broadcasters will have some idea of what's going on and how to explain it, but they won't speak while the House is in session. They'll have to wait for recesses in order to explain things to people, and that may be of some interest. There may not be any real breaks available because, there won't be anybody in charge to call time out and ask for recesses. Usually you have your recess subject to the call of the chair, but there's no chair except for, I guess, the House clerk. So it could be hours before C-SPAN commentators are able to tell people what's going on. Maybe MSNBC type cable shows will just follow along and then just have their talking heads gabbing over it. And then to make things worse, when they do have a break on C-SPAN, then they'll have people calling in from all over the country telling you that, various members of Congress are aliens and stuff. So that's not going to help anything.
Yeah,
either.
I'm looking forward to having some ex-senator explain to people how the House works.
I guess so. I mean, it'll be Rick Santorum, I'm sure, because he hasn't been elected in a quarter century. Oh, yeah, that's true. She was at least more recently elected. That would make more sense.
Right.
So.
But she's still not a creature of the House. And the creature, and the House is a completely different animal than the Senate.
Right. So who knows?
So what are we seeing here? Well, if this were the Senate, I don't want to know if it were the Senate. I want to know what's going on in the House.
Don't turn the House
now.
into the Senate. That's dangerous. I think it's dangerous to turn the Senate into the House. It must be the equal and opposite, right?
Right. Anyway, this is Brendan Buck.
He doesn't know anything.
Who worked for the last two Republican speakers of the House, so he has some credentials here.
He knows something.
Yeah, he knows something, even though he may not be...
I didn't know who he was, so I said he didn't know anything.
Anyway, he might not be the most center-left person you ever met in your life. Nonetheless, I think he's a never-Trumper. A failed speaker vote for Kevin McCarthy would be a historical event, he writes in the New York Times.
I believe that.
Opening day in the House of Representatives is typically marked by usual pageantry and the fleeting promise that this Congress will work better than the last. Is the mace on the wall or not?
On the wall?
Yeah.
Well, it's
or whatever,
near the wall.
Whatever it is to indicate that it's.
They put it up on a little pedestal there on the speaker's rostrum. Is
so
the mace? The mace will
immediately be dashed this year if the House fails to elect a speaker on the first ballot and descends into a floor fight unprecedented in modern times.
Yes.
A small band of Republican misfits have vowed to vote against Kevin McCarthy, the party's nominee for speaker. With a razor-thin majority, just 5 Republicans voting against him could deny McCarthy the gavel. Other people say 4. What happens if it's an exact tie?
That's not a majority, so...
That's not a majority, so that's not good enough. This would be no small event. The House last failed to elect a speaker on the first ballot in 1923, and it's only happened once since the Civil War.
1923, perfect.
And we've only had one Civil War.
Right, true. That was before 1923, and this is a 100-year anniversary thing. We could just say we're just marking the anniversary. It's just a thing we're doing to, it's just an exercise in historical drama. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, it's like the Rose Bowl without flowers.
Oh, yeah.
Electing a speaker is a responsibility given the House by the Constitution. Allowing the process to unravel into chaos would diminish the entire body and destroy Americans' confidence in the new Congress. That's why Democrats may play along by leaving.
It may be also entire body, really just half.
Mr. McCarthy still has time to reach an agreement with his critics, and he should do all within reason. Well, let's just skip that part. We already discussed
He
that.
doesn't have any.
He doesn't have any, and there isn't any to be had. Right, Otherwise, a self-serving power play by a small group of Republicans threatens to make a mockery of the institution. That's, in fact, what we're talking about, Brendan.
Yes, mockery.
A vote would badly weaken McCarthy or whoever the new speaker would be. The House is a majoritarian institution, and a speaker's power is ultimately derived from the ability to produce 218 votes. If Republicans are unable to muster the votes for speaker, it'll make very clear from the outset they can't be counted on to fulfill the body's basic responsibilities, like funding the government, preventing a credit default, by lifting the debt ceiling, that sort of thing. That's why putting conservatives on those financial committees is such a BFD on the one hand, and on the other hand, it would make it pretty obvious that these clowns aren't fit to rule.
Yeah. Well, you'll see
or govern, as we like to say in the state,
rule,
in
right,
the colonies.
Right, rule, well, right. This would reflect badly. It is interesting phrasing. Reflect badly on the entire body, but that'll be the challenge ahead, is to change minds and the easy expression of that, and let people know this is Republicans doing this.
Yeah,
guys.
But he has a really interesting take on what happens here. In this sense, listen to this paragraph that he writes.
Okay.
Should Mr. McCarthy come up short on the first ballot, it could take several more votes or days till we have a new speaker. And then he says, and I quote, "The Constitution requires that the House elect a speaker, and the vote takes priority over all other business. Nothing else can be done until the question is resolved."
Well, ordinarily.
Well, they could decide that that's not true.
Right. That's the issue. What if they just
What if they just say,
well,
we're doing it anyway, and we have the votes to prove it? You can't just say these things.
So traditionally, that's supposed to be the first thing that you do, and because there's a backup plan for what to do if there is not a speaker either yet, or when the first vote hasn't happened yet, there's no speaker. How do you convene the House and have the vote? And the answer is the clerk of the House does it. So the clerk of the House will preside.
Well, he says the House votes on a speaker before it formally adopts the rules.
Yes.
And the incoming members of Congress won't even be sworn in until after they choose a speaker.
That's fun to note. True, yeah.
That's typically how it works, but there's a difference between typically how it works and they decided in this particular instance they're going to do it some other way.
Yeah.
I mean, they always leave out the fact that, again, I learned this a long time ago. If they have the rules, they can do whatever they damn want. It's like watching those votes for time has run out and it's an hour and a half later and how come they're still waiting?
Yeah, right. But time is up. That's the rule,
Time
right?
is up.
Yeah, well, you know what? It isn't. I mean, it is up.
You can't do that in a World Cup soccer game.
Right. Well, just keep going.
Just go an extra hour and a half because we felt like it.
Yeah. The other guy wasn't here yet, so we waited. Now, yeah, they can do what they want. Of course, I mean, just think just for a second to see how absurd the whole situation is anyway, right? Well, the rules say you gotta choose your speaker first and then go on. You just said, well, what happens after you choose the speaker? Oh, right. Then we adopt the rules. Yeah, right. So if you haven't done that, who cares what the rules say? You haven't adopted any.
So without House rules, the body operates on precedent and basic parliamentary procedure. The precedent holds that a person must have a majority of those present and voting to be elected speaker. Those absent of voting present are not counted.
That's right.
Even when things run smoothly, it's time-consuming. Over more than an hour, all 435 members are called alphabetically. Each shouts the name of their choice, so it takes an hour just to call on them.
Yes, right. It was 435 of them. Some of them don't answer right away. Some of them make a big production of it. You're not supposed to say anything but the name, but then people say the great state of that whole thing. They don't, you're only individuals, but you can say, I proudly cast my vote as the first African-American elected.
Right. If I'm from Rhode Island, I'm going to make sure I say something about calamari.
Exactly. Right. They should do that. They should get the plate of calamari. It's only Rhode Island is allowed to do it. Come on, there's not that many of them. There's never going to be that many of them.
Right, exactly.
Let them do it.
The Congressional Research Service found that from 1945 to 1995, not a single member voted for anyone other than their party's nominee.
Yes, okay. Up to 95, huh?
But since then, every once in a while somebody does that.
Yeah, maybe. What was that guy's name? Gene, guy from, Democrat from Tennessee used to do that fairly frequently in the mid-90s. Doesn't matter. Right. I'll come up with it.
So the House can't function until the Speaker's elected and sworn in. Thus, the immediate order of business would be to simply vote again. The last time the first vote failed 100 years ago, it required 9 ballots over 3 days. And in 1856, the speakership wasn't resolved till the 133rd ballot. So after a failed vote, the procedural options for McCarthy and his detractors would be quite limited. Before another roll call vote, the House may entertain nominating speeches whereby any member can rise and speak in favor of a candidate. And this process may represent an opportunity for McCarthy's allies to make the case. Lawmakers could decide to change the process whereby a speaker is elected. Twice the House has voted to allow a speaker to be elected by plurality rather than majority. Both instances predated the Civil War. The House could move to adjourn, whether to a date or a certain time. Republicans may want to stop the voting to hold a meeting and attempt to resolve the matter. But like everything in the House, adjourning requires a majority, which could prove difficult. That'd be funny. Republicans want to stop the vote, so they move to adjourn, and the Democrats won't let them.
Yeah.
I mean, this could be fun.
That's true. It will be fun for a little while, and, and then get annoying.
Right.
But what can you do?
So in the House, if you have a majority of the votes, you can do anything you want. And if you don't, you can't do anything.
Yeah.
It's easy to imagine several rounds of voting taking place before somebody wins. And those opposing him know they're badly outnumbered, but they simply do not care. Andy Biggs has said that he's running, but nobody thinks Andy Biggs is actually the candidate.
Andy Biggs thinks that.
He's just a placeholder to make sure that other people vote for him rather than McCarthy, to keep McCarthy from getting a requisite number of votes.
Yeah.
They've claimed they actually have, this is now not in the piece, which is over, but they've claimed they actually have a candidate in mind, but they won't tell anybody who it is. There's been a bunch of names that have been floated for that. I don't know if you recall. We read off some of them. Fred Upton, for example.
Yeah, Fred Astaire. No, he's not. Okay.
Count Dooku, right, from Star Wars.
Chocula, all the counts.
We really don't know.
There's a usual list of things. The list comes from the list of people that other members have occasionally voted in protest for. Colin Powell, right, Fred Upton, no one has ever voted for. Oh, Gene Taylor, by the way, was the name of the guy I was trying to think of.
Gene Taylor, there you go.
He was from Mississippi, though, not Tennessee. And he switched back and ended up voting for Pelosi later in his career.
Right.
She realized she could count votes. She was all right.
Didn't Seth Moulton vote for somebody else?
Seth Moulton, I imagine.
Anyway, so I think that, that's pretty much what's been occupying my time, trying to figure out what's exactly going on here. And to me, again, it's interesting that the trade med gossip sheets really don't seem to know much more about it than we do. And they're talking to people all the time, and we're just watching them from afar, and and nobody knows.
Well, they're leaving out the most likely result at the end. They should probably warn people. Most likely, if a couple of Democrats decide they've had enough and they just don't want to hang out anymore, that's enough to make McCarthy the speaker, probably, and that's kind of boring. And he hints at it. He knows it's in there. And he can say his bases are covered. But I think editors were saying that. Give me the drama. I want the bad
but why
stuff.
would Democrats want to help Republicans resolve this?
After a while, just to get started and get the rules package adopted and get their committee assignments. And this is boring. It's not helpful anymore. Who knows? Or I guess if they say we really actually have to come to a resolution and McCarthy's just not going to get the votes and Democrats keep doing that.
Why don't they just play hardball for a while?
I guess, they may do that and they may have some solution in mind or we'll absent ourselves as soon as you nominate this person. But I think I don't know. I just think that they said the only deal that they can actually make work is if McCarthy is still on the ballot and still close and all the alternatives are just not getting any traction.
Right. I mean, the other alternative they could come up with, which seems highly unlikely, but still is theoretically possible, is if 7 of you come up with a candidate we can live with, we'll vote for that person.
Yeah.
In which case we won't leave and we won't, lower the number of people who are needed. It'll be all of us plus 7 of you.
They won't do it on the first ballot for a number of reasons. Even if they don't have any particular interest in embarrassing the Republicans, which they probably should. But if they were nice people and they didn't want to embarrass the Republicans, they're still not going to walk out. No one wants to be absent for the chance.
This is a way to get there without leaving.
Yes. So, if they can do that, I guess if it happens quickly, otherwise you're just competing against Democratic boredom and, boredom may win the day better than strategy, right? We have a big strategy if it gets to the 20th hour. Right. Anyway, I got to eat.
I have nothing else to say about that. And we don't know what's going on. And I guess we'll know in the next 24 hours. So when we talk Wednesday, we'll be able to say what happened Tuesday.
Yes. Even if there is no speaker, we'll be able to say there's no speaker.
And if there is a speaker, we'll tell you how it happened.
Yeah, I guess so. Or read you the articles about it, at the very least. Easy.
So, moving on to other topics, I should note...
wait a minute, we have to have a resolution. You can't just move to another topic. And
there's only 2 of us. How do we get to a majority?
I'll leave. This is out. I was trying to engineer this the whole time.
You can't do that.
Bye.
I can do that. You can't do that.
Yes, right. Okay. Well, I could outlast you, and then the show goes in my direction. But that was going to happen anyway. So, all right, let's entertain another motion.
So, since the last time we met, Pope Benedict is dead.
That is true.
That
wasn't the way I was going to say it, but all right. Yeah, I wasn't going to say anything. Probably that's true.
The New York Times had here's one from the Washington Post: How Benedict's death could reshape the Catholic Church. The traditionalist movement doesn't have another figure equal to him. Within the article,
yes,
they have this line which I actually love, so I stole it.
All right.
It says, "He was far from universally beloved." And that seems like a fitting epitaph to me because it's neither cruel nor untrue.
Yeah, all right.
He was not particularly popular amongst those who were non-traditionalists. People felt that, including in Germany, It was great that he was the first German pope in a while, if ever. I don't know. I don't keep track of such things. But on the one hand, he had made moves that his predecessor, who was much more universally beloved, didn't make in trying to stamp out sexual abuse in the Catholic Church, and on the other hand, didn't go nearly far enough.
Yes.
So,
well, what can you do? It's a tough one.
So he was a controversial figure when it came to that.
He wasn't going to be the guy to.
He wasn't going to be the guy, and he wasn't going to be the guy to say it's okay for gays to marry, and he wasn't going to be the guy to do any of the things that you wanted him to do.
Yeah.
And
which
so
made me
he was
reevaluate
universally beloved.
Yeah. It's made me reevaluate his resignation. I didn't know what to say about it at the time anyway. I mean, who cares? What I have to say about it. But yeah, I'm wondering whether maybe, he was in a position where he was just like, it's just literally best for everybody if I just get out of the way and give up the job.
Yep.
And
instead I'll take a job, which I'll
amazing.
invent for myself because, we're not used to this.
Right. Yeah.
In the modern church, anyway.
Could have been Speaker of the House.
I mean, there was a time, I suppose, there were 3 popes, but, that's, as we like to say, ancient history.
Even further back than there were 2 votes for Speaker back in 1923.
Right.
Like 1323.
So nothing about Avignon here, but it's just it's a thing. It happened, and definitely worth mentioning that. In fact, it did.
Yeah, it would have been interesting to read the columns from back then.
Right.
Well, if there's no
I wonder what
valid
Twitter said about it.
Right. They can always burn. Maybe they could burn something to make yellow smoke and see what happens.
Right. This is just an excuse to say something.
All right.
This is Ross Barkan writing in The Nation magazine, The Ukraine, The Nation. Who's afraid of the big bad Twitter files? Just because the mainstream media decided to ignore them doesn't mean the files aren't newsworthy or important.
Oh, boy.
And tries to make the case of trying to treat them fairly, trying and failing, in my view. A couple of meta things to say about this. First of all, it reminds me of the difference between, what we like to call the I reporters and the S reporters, the intuitive and the,
all right.
Step-by-step reporters. Step-by-step reporters are always going to find something newsworthy or important.
All right.
And it's not
people,
the bigger picture.
Understand.
It's, look, this happened, you reported it, and that's our job. We find things, and then we tell you what we found.
Okay.
And they tend to leave out context.
Yes.
And they tend to not really look at the big picture. And they say to you, well, if that's what you want, go do opinion columns. We're just like regular news reporters. And that sometimes works very well for what they do. And sometimes it doesn't work at all. And this is one of those cases where it doesn't work at all.
Whoops.
And the reason is the bigger picture is what's going on with the Hunter Biden laptop story to begin with. And you might say, yes, well, we understand by now that the laptop passed through a whole bunch of shady custody before it got to us, and it came through Rudy Giuliani, so why should we believe anything that's on it, even though 90% of it might be real and 10% of it might not be.
Okay.
And reporters like Ross Barkan will say, well, it's our job to figure out which is the newsworthy and which isn't. And so we can go into the details and say this file was authenticated and that file wasn't, and that's why you shouldn't dismiss the whole thing, yada, 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 which misses the entire point of why was the Hunter Biden files being presented in the first place, which had a lot to do with the main reason that Trump was impeached the first time. True. He wanted a scandal. He wanted to create one. He wanted the appearance of one. It didn't matter whether it was a real scandal or not. So he wanted his buddy Zelensky to do him a favor.
His buddy. Yeah, all right.
Just do me a favor. And, I'll give you the arms you need to defend yourself against the Russians. But in the meantime, do me a favor. Mm-hmm. So, again, stepping back, the bigger picture here is that what's on the Hunter Biden laptop, whether it's real or not, it wasn't made up. There is a real Hunter Biden laptop. It has stuff on it. Okay. But who cares? Well, we reporters who want to get all the detail. No. The whole point here is that the Trump world, people who are floating all this stuff about Hunter Biden, are trying to tell you, the public, and reporters who don't see the big picture, that everybody's corrupt, including the Bidens. Sure. Look at their son Hunter. You don't need to know the details of what's on there. The fact that, he's not a good person, that he's a bad person who did bad things. You don't even have to know what they are. The point is all families have fail sons, and the Bidens are no different than the Trumps in this regard.
No. Okay.
So get used to the Trumps having fail sons and being a corrupt family. Everybody's like that. Look at the Bidens. Look at this Hunter Biden story that you don't even know the details of. That's the big picture here. That's what all of this is about. It's what it's always been about. It's to try to muddle things. And that's why when you try to read articles like this and say, okay, so you're saying there's some there, where's the beef? You can't really read the article and get it because that was never the point. The point was just to give you the impression that there's something not quite right. And that alone is what the Trump world is trying to do. And so not covering it actually has justification. Not covering it isn't because, I'm turning my back on something that doesn't fit Democrats. No, the reason you're turning your back and not covering it is because you're not falling for the nonsense that they're pushing, that reporters like Ross Barkan will fall for.
I see.
And saying, it's my job to go in there and do a good job and decipher all of this and then tell you about it. And if it's murky, well, maybe the article will be murky. And by the time you finish the article, you'll just have the vague sense that something's not right. That's exactly what they want, and that's why they did this in the first place.
Yeah, okay, I got
That's
you
what they did with the Hillary emails.
Right.
And,
they did also far
once,
worse.
Shame on you. Fool me twice. I'm George W. Bush. You can't do that.
Yeah.
And so for people to say, well, I'm not doing this Twitter file crap is perfectly legitimate.
I would say, okay, I got you now, and maybe we could drive that point home. I guess if he doesn't get it, we could just. I guess an enterprising reporter could ask, "Does Ross Barkan have any siblings, and do they have laptops? Because every family has a fail son. The Barkans have one too. Should we look for him? Well, no, of course not, because that's not. Oh, wait a minute. I don't understand. I thought it was just a matter. Look, truth just wants to be free, man. I'm just a reporter. It's not my fault if people don't think the Barkans are important enough. The facts are the facts. I have to follow them where they lead. No. You can make an editorial decision that it doesn't make any sense to expose the Barkan family problems because it doesn't have any relevance to anyone. But the Bidens do. Well, not Hunter.
So let me tell you what he said so you can see why I'm ranting about it.
All right.
He says, among other things, the Twitter files do matter. They matter because Twitter has become the de facto public square for a fourth or so of America, and for the many influential politicians, journalists, pundits, and celebrities who continue to populate the platform. So he's saying Twitter's important, and the fact that Twitter decided they were going to do things to make people not cover it is a big deal. These are true and unrelated to the bigger point that the whole thing is a PSYOP campaign. Right. And every point he says is true, and it still doesn't get to the, why is the disinformation not being covered here? Twitter has the power, he writes, as was revealed in 2020, to determine how far news travels. The files showed how Twitter deliberated over banning certain accounts, Donald Trump's being the biggest, and ultimately suppressed through the removal of links and blocking of direct messages reporting by the New York Post on Hunter Biden's laptop, which turned out to be a valid news story in the sense that the younger Biden's laptop was real, and so were all of its contents. Again, fine.
Maybe.
The younger Biden's laptop is, in fact, real. All of its contents were not authenticated as being real. That's incorrect. But even if it were correct, it's still misinformation. And the point is still to try to make it seem like the Bidens were somehow vaguely corrupt. And if you don't recognize that, you're never going to understand what's going on, and you shouldn't be reporting on it.
Yes, okay.
Then he goes on to say, most liberals didn't care because it was October 2020 and the defeat of Trump mattered more than any commitment to free speech principles. It's got nothing to do with free speech principles. It has everything to do with recognizing what they are doing. It's their way of cheating. And if you don't understand that, again, you shouldn't put yourself up on a pedestal to judge
don't do that.
What liberals did or didn't care about.
I will. Yeah, that certainly can't be the case. And if you want, because if you're going to fling around accusations about free speech principles, an election of Trump to a second term might be the greatest death blow against free speech principles there could possibly be, all by itself. So I suppose if you want to just weigh it all out, then you have to start thinking about, well, what happens to free speach principles under a second Trump administration? But I guess that didn't interest him because he's not a reporter.
Then he goes on and talks about First Amendment and free speech, Twitter being a private company.
Sure.
It's a lovely debate that has nothing to do with the overarching point. You're being used.
I think so. But they were free to use you. That's the important point.
Yeah.
Apparently.
Anyway, so that's my rant for today. It just really burns me when I see this because it's like, look, you need to step back and see the bigger picture. You need to be intuitive here and not just, step by step by step by step. It's important.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'll have to agree. I mean, we could be, maybe they'll find out in 2024 as we find ourselves possibly wrapped up in another Trump campaign and he's having people punch reporters again. Like, where was you're in favor of this, apparently, Ross. This was your idea of First Amendment purism. Terrific. Wonderful. Thank God we got to this stage. Appreciate your input. Okay. Yeah, there is a bigger picture here. You're right. Good rant, I would say. How about that? Is that all right with you?
Yeah, it was a rant.
Yeah.
And it may or may not have a majority vote, but, we can keep taking votes on it.
That is true. Also, if
that rant is elected speaker.
Yeah, especially as you could now have the option to absent yourself and make sure that it's elected. So, all right, well, or you could stick around to vote for historic speaker candidate for another hour, 2 days, whatever it takes.
Right. Jamie Dupree just tweets, Nick Lotus said, tomorrow I'll be honored to be sworn in. And Jamie Dupree says, nobody gets sworn in until there's a speaker.
Even George Santos. All right. Great. Thanks, Greg. See you Wednesday. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I don't know if we got it in under the wire, but in case you were wondering, because you're brand new to the show, we will see Greg again on Wednesday. That day may have been cut off as we head into our break. Just poorly timed, and we'll cause editing problems later, but we'll make up for it. All right, let's see. What other fun things have we got to cover here? I think the biggest news we have for anybody, the biggest piece of information to try to figure out what's happening in Congress this week, beginning tomorrow, is remember that a working majority is enough to elect the speaker. I imagine that's the way it eventually resolves itself. And the only question is, for how long does it make strategic sense for Democrats to continue to stick around and vote for their own candidate? In other circumstances, it might happen quicker. I don't know. I guess it all depends on, one, how much interest do Democrats have in creating that chaos? If Nancy Pelosi were standing for speaker again and you took out of the equation the fact that people will be making a big deal out of voting for Hakeem Jeffries for speaker, and rightly so, might they agree to absent themselves earlier, or might they have agreed to absent themselves on the first ballot because there's not as much historical significance in voting for Nancy Pelosi for speaker, given that she's been speaker for so long. So she's still the first woman speaker, but okay, we're used to it already. Freshman lawmakers, Democrats might want to stick around in order to say they had cast a vote for her or something like that. But others could plausibly absent themselves if they had any interest in making the transition smooth, which I guess they don't. So I imagine for several reasons they'll be interested in staying for the first ballot and voting for Jeffries, and therefore probably, if the reports are correct, denying Kevin McCarthy the speakership on the first ballot. The question is, how many ballots do they stick around for? And how long does each ballot take? And what happens in between the balloting? That's another question. I don't think I've ever actually figured out what I think they're going to do if after the end of the first hour, and remember, it does take, about an hour to get through the roll call and ask everybody. And then, there's a few minutes to actually do the math. Like, how many tick marks did you make, for McCarthy, and how many did you make for Jeffries, and how many for other people? And what's the vote count? You got to tell the clerk what the vote count is so they can read it out loud and make the news of it, and we'll figure out what happens next. So, that may be an hour plus. And I guess there's probably some question still about, well, do they just start over again? Well, the answer is we don't have, there were enough people voting that you need 218 in order to be elected speaker, and McCarthy has, what did they say? There were 9 or so that were going to withhold their votes, so has 209 votes. So we got to start this all over again. And whatever. Do they do it right away? Do they break for lunch? What happens? The C-SPAN people get to talk. The callers get to call in and say how many of them are aliens. That I don't know. And then they'll probably have some meetings probably off the floor. I imagine Democrats at some point will approach floor leader Republicans and say, as it turns out, a number of our members have given up for the night. They've taken off. If you wanted to hold the speaker vote now, you could probably go ahead and do it and confirm McCarthy if that's what you want. Or will they do it right away and try to keep the chaos to a minimum? I don't know. Maybe that was the point of that Republican operative saying that that it embarrasses the institution as a whole as opposed to just the Republican Party. Would that convince some Democrats that there's some interest among for them in minimizing the embarrassment if it's really is for the whole body rather than just for the Republicans? I don't know. But I guess that's what we'll be having to look out for. And, and I guess we'll maybe get a chance to discuss that possibly with Joan. I don't know what kind of assignment duties she'll be carrying on that particular Tuesday morning, that being tomorrow, because it's the opening day of the new Congress. I wonder if she'll be tied up for that or whether she'll be free to come on in and let us know what she thinks of things and what might go down. And the action won't have started on the House floor yet anyway, so we'll see. All right, Greg's sending me a couple more notes here, either further questions or other suggestions about where to go. Let's see. Oh, okay, some thoughts from Matt Glassman, who's always a good resource here. There's at least a couple things. On another note, he says, is this somebody else's tweet here? Who is this? I don't recognize this name right off the bat. Melanie Zanona, Capitol Hill reporter for CNN, tweeting on another note, McCarthy has already moved into the speaker's suite, which we're told is standard protocol. That could be, but he'll have to move back out if he doesn't get the gavel. Well, that's true, which is totally still up in the air. Just a remarkable moment we're in. I guess probably momentum alone, inertia alone has him moving into the speaker's suite. Just because, like we said, for 100 years, there's never been any doubt as to who was really going to end up the speaker. And so for 100 years, they've been moving the leading candidate of the ostensible majority party into, and there's no one who can say no to him at this point. At the moment, in case you're wondering about the justification for such a thing, the speaker's suite is currently, well, as we say, occupied by Kevin McCarthy, apparently, but still under the control of Nancy Pelosi. It's still the 117th Congress right now, and won't be the 118th until tomorrow. So the speaker controls that room. The speaker controls, the disposition of most rooms in the Capitol complex, and people occupy them by dint of her fiat, essentially, which of course, she only has by dint of a majority of the body actually supporting her to have that power, in case you're concerned about too much power resting in one set of hands. But so in other words, she can say if there's any interest in her part on or in denying McCarthy access to the suite, she could do it. But clearly there's an interest in, even if you're interested in sowing chaos among the Republican Party or the House in general, if that's the way you view it, then there would be pretty good reason for her to say, there are people in the Republican Party who are going to be angry and upset that McCarthy has just moved in. He's measuring the drapes. How dare he? Well, all right. To the extent that happens, I like that. Go ahead and move in. I'm moving out, so it doesn't bother me any. So we might as well just move you in. So, okay. Let's see. He says, so Melanie was tweeting that along with Jake Sherman. She attached Jake Sherman's tweet, because you're still allowed to do quote tweets on Twitter, which were my lifeblood on Twitter, and it still doesn't work on Mastodon, though apparently all the powers that be at Mastodon, and who elected them anyway, are debating whether or not they could have such a similar functionality. They have a very weird idea over there, in my view, of the value of quote tweeting. They view it. Have you noticed this debate? I don't know whether those of you who have moved over to the Mastodon have taken notice of this or not. And not everybody was as enthusiastic a quote tweeter as I was. But their view of it on Mastodon is that quote tweets were used on Twitter to create a toxic environment, that it was all about, that the only experience they had, I guess, with people quote tweeting was dunking on people. I'm quote tweeting this person without actually responding to them so I can show to all my followers what a dummy this person is, with a little note attached that said, this person's a dummy, go beat them up. And then everybody would mob the other person and tell them how dumb they are. And there's no doubt that is how it's very frequently used. And I have no doubt that there are certainly examples in my own past that people could point to and say, what else could this possibly be but that? And I would probably have to say, yeah, you're right. I guess even without any particular thought being given to it, I might actually say, that one, I actually did want people to see how dumb that was and to go beat that person up. No doubt about that. But 90%, I hope, of my use of it was really just to, add a comment or a joke or something that doesn't make any sense without the context of the other person's tweet, and it really wasn't done at their expense. It was very often done with friends and people I like and support, and just piling on to the point that they were making more than anything else. But anyway, that's still possible, and that's what Melanie was doing here with Jake Sherman's tweet, which read, new, just caught up with GOP leader Kevin McCarthy in the Capitol. He said he's feeling actually really good. That's a quote. As he entered the Speaker of the House suite on the second floor of the Capitol, I asked him if he'd set in motion. Oh, I see. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I asked him if he'd set, what would then be, the motion to vacate at 1, and he smiled and walked into the office. So now we know what that means, set the motion to vacate at 5. That is to say, the threshold, the number of members who would have to join in making such a motion, how apparently under the new rules will be 5 rather than just 1. I don't think that makes a real substantive difference, but whatever. By the way, one story about the Speaker's suite of rooms, I can't recall whether this is still the case, but at one point in relatively recent history, 80s, 90s, I learned that this was the case. Kevin McCarthy, understandably happy and proud to move into the Speaker's suite of offices because of what it represents. That is to say that he would be the Speaker. This is the pinnacle of his career, et cetera, et cetera. But the actual rooms themselves, he's in the minority leader's suite of rooms it was until, I guess, today or whatever. Like they point out here, Jake Sherman saying, he's feeling really good as he entered his Speaker's suites on the second floor of the Capitol. The minority leader's suites are also, I think, on the second floor of the Capitol, by the way, and by many accounts are a nicer set of nicer suite of rooms than the speakers. Now, they may have changed over the years. Each speaker can, like I said, they have control over the rooms in the Capitol, and they can kind of appropriate different spaces to themselves. But at some point, back in not ancient history, but relatively recent, modern era, during one of the changeovers, and this might actually go back to like the 1950s or so, when, which prior to the 1990s was the last time control switched between Republicans and Democrats. Don't forget that there was some 40 years where Democrats were the majority in the House, all the way, 50s all the way through the 90s. But so it may go back to the 50s then, when Republicans, I believe, gained control of the House relatively briefly, but then lost control of the House again for the last time until the 90s. And at some point, the Democratic leader and Republican leader, back then they were, closer friends, closer colleagues. And in addition to losing control of the House and losing the speakership and becoming minority leader, the blow, that was coming down on the then Republican leader was you also had to move out of the fancy digs you were in as speaker. And the incoming Democratic speaker said, you know what? Keep the suite of offices you have. Just make it the minority office, and I'll stay where I am. We'll save the money, save the trouble of the move. It's a big headache anyway, and I'll just make the speaker's office where I am, and that's that. And it stuck, and nobody switched it back. And so I think since then, the minority leader's office, occupied by Republicans, has been the nicer. So that was the big sop. Like, you lost control of the House, but at least you get to keep the nicest offices. So, McCarthy may find out that, he probably doesn't care. They're all fine offices, and maybe you have to have a really, particular eye in order to be able to tell which of the two is the nicer. But at any rate, I guess if that's the case, I don't know. Who cares, really? I just thought it was interesting that, they make a big deal out of it because of the symbolism of moving into the speaker's office, but you're actually, and it's not that this is your first shot at a second floor office. You already had one, and it was considerably nicer than the one you're moving into now. Anyway, so okay. So the other thing, let's see, that was Melanie Zenona's tweet, and Greg sent us that one. And then he sent another one, this one from Matt Glassman, who says, I do wonder how many Republicans besides McCarthy and Scalise are quietly preparing for the chaos moment in hopes of becoming the unifying choice. I wouldn't want the speakership of this circus, but I'm sure there are many who think that they can make it work if the stars align. That's a possibility. And then this, I guess, more from Glassman here. Things would be reasonably orderly even after McCarthy falls or fails on the floor, and falls on the floor as well. I guess we might as well think about that possibility. Actually, just falling down the stairs of the speaker's rostrum and onto the floor. What were we saying? Things will be reasonably orderly even after McCarthy fails on the floor. If Scalise were also to fail on the floor, McCarthy backers could easily block him out of spite. The floodgates are really going to open, and lots of people might walk through the bullpen door. I just don't think it's going to get that far. Somebody asks, like, who? And he says, I would think Stefanik for sure. And that's, I think, probably true, given what we've been reading lately about Stefanik. If you want to share some of those stories, we might. Probably lots of lesser leadership types, too. McHenry seems more like Ryan in that he really doesn't want it at this point, but that might change if it comes on a platter. And then someone asks, is this circus being televised? And like, yeah, it's called C-SPAN. But all the real circus won't be on camera because that takes place, behind closed doors and off of the floor. All right. So let's see. What other fun things have we to share here? Okay. Well, I mentioned the Stefanik situation. As Greg comments on the Glassman comment that maybe Patrick McHenry would take the speakership even though he doesn't really want it if it comes on a platter, and he was thinking more along John the Baptist's head coming on a platter. That comes to mind sooner than Patrick McHenry speakership. All right. So at least Stefanik was the subject of a rather lengthy piece in the New York Times over the weekend. We have read similar pieces in the past, the royal we. I have. I don't know when I shared them with you. I think so. Generally about how Elise Stefanik kind of reinvented herself politically in the Trump era to become, one of the biggest Trump supporters out there, despite having begun her political career trying to sell herself as a moderate, for one thing, and then an anti-Trumper at the beginning of the Trump run for the presidency. But then when it became inevitable, or at least much more obvious that he was likely to at least seize control of the Republican Party, if not necessarily the presidency, but then eventually the presidency, well, he seized it, and Elise Stefanik became a huge Trump fan, and her fortunes have risen along with that, and that she has discovered that the key to the success she wanted was abandoning all prior principle and positions and hopes and dreams, and instead just chasing the power. And it was kind of a disturbing story, but this profile makes it even clearer. The New York Times has, and it's very long, and it will probably occupy the rest of the show if we chose to do things that way. I should quickly scan to see what other things anything else we absolutely have to share. And gosh, yeah, there are. So I don't know how much of this we would look at, but I can give you sort of the executive summary of it. I did read the piece already, which is rare. So I can kind of jump around a little bit. The piece in question, The Invention of Elise Stefanik, in the New York Times, dated December 31st, and updated just yesterday. I wonder what the updates were. The subheader reads, "To rise through the Trump-era GOP, a young congresswoman gave up her friends, her mentors, and her ideals. Will it be enough?" And it's a very intriguing read. If it gets to be too long to the point where we didn't read, there's lots of great examples in here, but the basic story is set up well enough. At the beginning, we'll just read Nicholas Confessore's recitation of the facts as he sets it up. Elise Stefanik had had enough. When was it? This was in the wake of the 2018 midterms. The young congresswoman was sick of commuting to Washington from upstate New York and weary of dialing for campaign dollars. She was demoralized that Republican primary voters had spurned so many of the women she had helped persuade to run for Congress. She was annoyed that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the Democratic socialist who had displaced her that fall as the youngest woman ever elected to the House, had not shown her the respect she felt was her due. Oh my. But it was bigger than that. For years, Ms. Stefanik had crafted her brand as a model moderate millennial, the future of hopeful aspirational politics in America. As her mentor, Paul Ryan, would describe her in Time magazine. But as her third term unfolded, according to current or former friends and advisors, it was becoming painfully clear that she was the future of a Republican Party that no longer existed. The party was now firmly controlled by Donald J. Trump, a populist president she didn't like or respect. A, quote, whack job, as she once described him in a message obtained by the New York Times. Fox hosts attacked her for not supporting Mr. Trump enough. Her friends criticized her for not opposing him more forcefully. "You don't understand," she would tell them. "You don't get how hard this is. Democrats were back in charge in the House. Mr. Ryan was gone, driven into early retirement." She told friends she was thinking of joining him. And now I'm reminded by the timeline here that, it wasn't until there was an opportunity to become a Trump super defender in his first impeachment that she really came out as a Trump supporter. That's how late in the game it was for her. But then she realized how quickly she could rise by playing this game and just said, to hell with it. All the things that I, once dreamt about achieving as a member of Congress, to hell with it all. I can achieve more taking this path. And it's really a disturbing story. So instead, she embarked on one of the most brazen political transformations of the Trump era. With breathtaking speed and alacrity, Ms. Stefanik remade herself into a fervent Trump apologist, adopted his over-torqued style on Twitter, up to and including, by the way, like intentional capitalization mistakes so that it would look more like a Trump tweet. It's incredible, really. She also embraced the conspiracy theories that animate his base, amplifying debunked allegations of dead voters casting ballots in Atlanta and unspecified, quote, irregularities involving voting machine software in 2020 swing states. The future of hopeful, aspirational politics in America now assails Democrats as the party of socialists, illegals, criminals, communist truth ministers, and media stenographers. In the process, she has rocketed from the backbench to the party's number 3 House leadership job, presiding over the conference's overall messaging. And so you might look at this rather, objectively and say, it's hard to convince her that the path that she was on of being, the voice of the moderate millennial, whatever the hell it was, but in the future of the Republican Party in the Paul Ryan mold, I guess, which may or may not ever have been the future of the party. But that was yielding nothing for her. She was a backbencher who no one ever heard of. And all she had to do was code switch and be, pretend or actually be a huge Trump supporter. And just, all you have to do is play that role and be as over the top as possible. And suddenly you're the Republican Party conference chair and at the apex of leadership. Why would you not continue to do that if all you cared about was power? Except, I think the thought was, oh no, she really cared about policy and I don't know what, wonkery at that point. And the rest of the story, if we don't get to all of it, is she came up through, this is the really, I don't know, to me it's still kind of weird and creepy. She came up through Harvard and the Institute of Politics there, and, was one of those kids who goes to college at Harvard and goes there with the idea in mind that I'm going to become a public elected official, a public servant, and I'm going to be all into policy and I'm going to make a difference in this country. But really, as it turns out, in the end, all that really underlay the whole thing was, I want to be an important person and I want what I say to go for whatever reason. And if I can do that, right now, at the start of my career and here in college, it looks like the way to do that is to become a Republican technocrat. And then my talent will be recognized by a party, even if it's full of crazies. They will say, well, there are a few people who know what they're doing and are eloquent and well-spoken, and we'll just put them out front, and that'll be me. And then it turns out, no, actually, this party wants morons who talk like they're straight out of hee-haw and say rotten things and hurt people. So I guess I'm going to do that instead. Imagine using your Harvard education to do that. But there are several such people, right? She's not the only one. And that's the other unstated and extremely creepy aspect of this article, and makes me want to read the rest of it to you. Maybe we'll just do that because what the hell? We got a whole week ahead of us. But man, the fact that so many current wackadoodle Republicans are, in fact, Ivy League graduates who come to realize, well, my smarts and my Ivy League education actually makes it easy for me, even if it's a little uncomfortable at first, to pretend to be a whack job, a-hole, know-nothing. And that's what people like. And since we weren't going to accomplish anything anyway, why don't I not accomplish something as a widely respected, well, not respected, but a widely known quantity anyway in the Republican Party. I'll be a leader. And maybe I can, sneak something by, or maybe I just don't care about sneaking anything by. I just want to be looked at as a leader. And it really never mattered to me at all, as it turns out, what I accomplished while I was here and how many of them there are and how they all know one another. And a lot of them make appearances in this article, both on the Democratic side and the Republican side. Well, I knew her when, sure, I'm a Democrat and she's a Republican, and that was always the case, but I knew her when. And it's weird that they know one another and that they all essentially make the same decision in one way or another. Whatever I do, I'm going to make it to the upper echelons, whether I accomplish things or not. And it's weird and kind of creepy and gross how many of them are out there and how many have actually made that plan work for themselves. Anyway, I'll read just a little bit more as we get ready to take our third break and head into the last segment. Let's see, where did we stop with this Stefanik thing, right? She embarked on this brazen political transformation, et cetera, even adopting the Trump mode of expression on Twitter and calling Democrats socialists and pedophiles, et cetera. Ms. Stefanik's reinvention made her a case study in the collapse of the old Republican establishment and its willing absorption into the new Trump-dominated one. But as Republicans prepare to take control of the House in the coming days, her climb to MAGA stardom may also be a cautionary tale. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I'm scanning everything else that is out there, and there are a lot of stories that we really need to move on to and pay some attention to. But I'm thinking, the more I think about it, I really enjoyed this Elise Stefanik part, and I think this will tell us a little bit about perhaps where we could see the Republican Party headed in the next, what are they going to do with the leadership role that they've taken on for them, so that they've been handed along with the majority, and what's it going to be like? And, the situation is pretty bad. And there are a lot of other stories, and I think we'll get to all of them eventually. And I want to be first out there and let you know what I've seen in the news, because you'll be hearing about it in the next couple of days, but you are going to hear about it. It's okay. If not everything is, first reported here. We're not first reporting it either. We're not going out and, breaking the news ourselves. But if you haven't had a chance to read through the news today, you'll hear about it first, perhaps sometimes here. But in this case, maybe you'll hear about it, or maybe you've already heard about it over the weekend anyway. One thing I did want to throw out there, though, since tomorrow they'll be talking about rules and the concessions that McCarthy made in order to get votes, and if he eventually is the speaker, it'll be important to know. As Politico reports and reported, I think before we had even wrapped up from last week, conservatives' latest ask of McCarthy, a broad Biden administration investigation. They had to be asking for, they're looking to Benghazi, Biden. That was a formula for success for them. The Republicans, including McCarthy himself, had, very frequently blurted out that the whole thing was about taking down Hillary Clinton, and it worked for them. So obviously they're going to try and do the same thing now. I think the situation has changed. It's different. It won't work the same way, but they're going to do it nonetheless. They don't have any other play. So the subheader here reads, opponents and on-the-fence Republicans want him, McCarthy, to set up a select committee that would probe what they termed, this is interesting because all Republican accusations are confessions, they term weaponized government. The thinking of and I'm sure this is Murdery Trader Green and others like her, making calls for this. They feel certain that the Biden administration has weaponized government against his enemies and is targeting Republicans by using the power of the state to et cetera, et cetera. All the things, of course, that everyone was pretty sure because all the evidence was there, whereas there's very little evidence here. That Trump was doing to Democrats, but just doing ineptly because he didn't really know where the levers were and what power actually lay in his hands, besides the power to possibly declare himself president again. He would have then found out what else he could do, perhaps, in his second term. But to give you some flavor of this before we jump back to Elise Stefanik, who would help implement this plan. Jordan Carney reporting for Politico on this one. House conservatives are upping their demands on Kevin McCarthy as he tries to lock down Speaker's gavel. The new price, a select committee with a huge scope of targets. While the Republican leader and soon-to-be committee chairs have already lined up a laundry list of investigations that will largely command the House GOP's agenda next year because they don't have any policy, it's not enough for some McCarthy critics. Some of those opposing and on the fence about the Californians' speakership bid want him to start a new panel, one that could direct probes against the entities they've castigated for years, including the FBI, the Justice Department, the IRS, and Anthony Fauci. Grrr, we're so mad. Further complicating McCarthy's position is that other Republicans aren't on board. Some of his allies are skeptical that such a select committee wouldn't severely overlap with the investigative plans that incoming chairs, such as Representatives Jim Jordan and James Comer, have already worked on for months. But after largely percolating on the edges of the conference and conservative media, the calls are getting harder for the speaker hopeful to ignore. Several members who McCarthy needs to win over if he's going to secure the gavel are openly using the creation of such a panel to investigate what they call a weaponized government as a bargaining chip as the California Republican tries to lock down their votes. Here's Chip Roy, who was mentioned before. He says the group has had good conversations with incoming chairs, but that he and other conservatives are pitching the select committee as a way to coordinate the conference's investigative plans under one roof. And I'm sure he hopes under his chairmanship, I'm sure. They aren't naming names on who they believe should lead the panel. Him, he's thinking, and other people who support this. They all think that they should chair the panel. Though at least one skeptical McCarthy ally has argued that if it has to happen, it should be Jordan, which is weird. And he'll want to do it from the Judiciary Committee, the traditional investigative committee. It needs to be targeted the right way, Roy said about the party's investigations. You don't get many bites at the apple. You've got to get it done right. Conservatives say they want to model the panel off the 1970s Church Committee. That will be a subject we could discuss with Joan tomorrow, which conducted a landmark investigation that uncovered significant surveillance abuses among the intelligence community and the IRS, leading to the formation of the Senate Intelligence Committee. But it's a high bar that's almost certain to fall short. While the Church Committee was a bipartisan operation, Democrats have frequently criticized the GOP's targeting of the FBI, and their party is highly unlikely to help fuel probes they've already derided as political sideshows. And Democrats are already gearing up to rebut GOP investigations next year. Maryland Representative Jamie Raskin, who will be on the front lines as the top Democrat on the Oversight Committee, summed up how he views his party's responsibilities as it deals with the Republican probes, a truth squad in the sense that we will have to debunk conspiracy theories. And former senior aide to the Democratic senator who chaired the Church Committee has also criticized Republicans for trying to make the church comparison specifically, accusing them of wanting to invoke church's legacy and not to push for real solutions, but to obtain impunity for themselves and punish their enemies. But underscoring how much the church rhetoric has injected itself into the party's thinking, McCarthy, during a recent Fox Business appearance, tipped his hand toward the idea, saying, You're almost going to have a church-style investigation to reform the FBI. McCarthy notably didn't specifically mention setting up a new committee, and those comments would also align with previously planned investigations. The ambiguous comments come as the Californian tries to lock down the votes to claim the Speaker's gavel in a thin majority and wants to avoid alienating any more members. A spokesperson for the GOP leader didn't respond to multiple questions about whether McCarthy was endorsing and starting a new panel or just an investigation into the Justice Department and FBI, which is already in the works. Probably the latter, I would say. The risk this runs, I guess, in order to jump out of this and get back to at least Stefanik, because I'd like to, is for every vote you pick up by saying, yes, there'll be a special committee, and yes, you'll be on it, and that's how you get those votes, you lose perhaps the support of other committee members or members of other committees or chairs of other committees who thought that they were going to be taking the lead on this stuff. This was supposed to be my rise to stardom. I was going to conduct this investigation. If you hand this to some other guy, maybe I don't want you as speaker after all. So, where one vote matters, you got to look out for that. So let's see. But just to give you some idea of what they want to look at, House Republicans say they now expect to probe the treatment of individuals who were jailed for participating in the January 6th Capitol attack. They should have been thrown off a cliff, but, they're going to complain they didn't get, dairy-free meals in prison, whatever. Let's see. Murdery Trader Green previously pressed McCarthy on that investigation last month. Comer noted there was an ongoing discussion about which panel needs to take the lead on that, adding that the Oversight Committee will have a lot on the platter, but will do whatever we're asked to do from leadership. McCarthy also threatened to subpoena intelligence officials who signed a letter in 2020 warning that a New York Post story about Biden's son, Hunter, might have its origins in a Russian disinformation operation. So they worried that that was the case. That may or may not have been correct. And in their investigation of weaponized government, they now say they will use the power of the House of Representatives to criminalize the speculation that one among 15 Russian psychological operations was, in fact, the 16th, when it might turn out not to have been the case, and therefore you should be languishing in jail for guessing wrong about what disinformation there was and wasn't out there. This all in the name of de-weaponizing government. Ooh, that'll be interesting. Anyway, he hasn't officially backed the step, but he opened the door initially in April and then signaled that an impeachment could be on the table, in particular for Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, depending on the results of the investigation during a trip to the southern border in November, because that was important for him to be there. All right. You get the idea of what they're going to do with this thing. Is it crazy? Yeah, sure. Does it have a lot of support among Republicans? Probably. Does it have support among Republican leadership? Probably that too. Why? Because of things like the reinvention of Elise Stefanik. Let's turn back to that and read a little bit more. We'll probably return to the Politico article at some point later in the week just to make sure we haven't missed any of the crazy ideas coming down the pipeline here, and see whether we can anticipate their coming up in either in the rules package or in the opening days when they make committee assignments. If they're going to form a new committee, that's something they could do early on right away with the rules and committee assignments, though they could certainly wait and just formulate a new committee midstream later on. It doesn't all have to be done tomorrow or even this week. So where were we? Right. How the Stefanik rise to MAGA stardom may be a cautionary tale. Mr. Trump's obsession with litigating his own defeat has left him at once the party's most potent force and its greatest liability, blamed by many Republicans for their failure to win the Senate in November and for a House majority that some fear may be too narrow to govern effectively. And just as a reminder, we're back in now The Invention of Elise Stefanik, the New York Times piece by Nick Confessori. Republican politicians and voters are now agonizing anew over the price of their alliance with Mr. Trump. It's crystal, 3 crystals, clear. Mr. Ryan told Sirius XM, "We lose with Trump if we stick with Trump. If we dump Trump, we start winning." It's not that clear, by the way. But, as a matter of fact, you stuck with Trump and now you've been handed the House. You should have had a larger majority. You should also have had the Senate, but you didn't get the House. It's, they're going to point to that and say that's a win. For her part, Ms. Stefanik has only doubled down, betting that her alliance with Mr. Trump will carry her further still to a job in his cabinet, perhaps, or even a slot as his running mate in 2024. In November, even before Mr. Trump made his bid for re-election official, she became one of the few senior Republicans to endorse him. Republican voters determine who is the leader of the Republican Party, and it's very clear President Trump is the leader of the Republican Party, she said, putting her loyalty on display in exactly the way that Mr. Trump prizes. The loyalty, I added the exactly there, by the way. It should have been there. The loyalty has already exacted a steep cost. Within the old line Republican circles that spent years grooming Ms. Stefanik for a different kind of stardom, charting her turn toward Mr. Trump has become a kind of morose parlor game. Mr. Ryan has told associates he now considers her the biggest disappointment of his political career. One by one, many of her oldest and closest friends have stopped speaking with Miss Stefanik, leaving a trail of embittered final texts and emails. Over dinners and group chats, they sometimes talk about what happened to the talented woman they once loved and respected. What's really made her abandon her old political self? What had they missed? In other words, we're reading through a manifesto here and wondering how did we miss the red flags that turned her into a school shooter. It's a similar kind of feel, actually. Ms. Stefanik insists they missed nothing at all. She declined to be interviewed by the Times because, you win points with MAGA by declining that. And in a statement responding to questions for this article, Alex DeGrasse, executive director of her political operation, denied she had ever considered quitting Congress and repeatedly rejected criticism of her as sexist. You'll see here, by the way, it's now her MO. Every time they reveal something in this story that tells us something about, oh my God, yeah, why did she do that? That seems so hypocritical. Her operation just denies it. Oh, we never did that. That's total fabrication. You're liars. You're lying press. We have to get rid of you. We should hang the members of the whatever. It's really quite amazing. And then, of course, every criticism of her is sexism. Mr. DeGrasse denounced anonymous sources who are clearly viciously anti-Trump, anti-Elise, and anti-Republican, who clearly hate the American people who support Trump. As criticism of her mounted from former friends and allies, Ms. Stefanik has argued that in embracing Mr. Trump, she's merely serving her older, predominantly white and rural constituency, as she has since first being elected. I'm the same member of Congress I've always been, she said after her breakout performance defending Mr. Trump during his first impeachment. In an important sense, Ms. Stefanik is right. Virtually no one who knows her believes she has any genuine attachment to Trump-style populism, unlike Mr. Trump's earliest supporters, for example, or media figures like Fox host Tucker Carlson. Indeed, over dozens of interviews, former aides, advisors, and friends going back to Ms. Stefanik's Harvard days struggled to identify any of her deeply held political beliefs at all. This is where it gets really interesting. Most recalled instead her generic loyalty to the Republican Party, her intense competitiveness, and her unerring ability to absorb what she thought people around her wanted and to reflect it back at them. A bit of a Tracy Flick here, I think. Eager to advance, skilled at impressing more powerful figures with her intelligence and work ethic, she has spent years embedding herself wherever the action seems to be at the time. She knows exactly what she's signed up for, said Kate Yearwood Young, a former friend from Harvard. There was no radicalization. And next up, how about this one for a section header? I am Ultra MAGA. One day this past October, Ms. Stefanik stood in front of a dozen gigantic bins of, ready, bovine teat cleanser. Did you know there was such a thing? Is there no reason we can't cross this over and make a... All right. Well, anyway, decrying the war on chocolate milk to a nodding crowd of farmers. Now, you might think an incredulous crowd of anybody, but apparently among farmers, this was a clear-cut issue, reflecting a rural district here. This is what she means. Months earlier, New York City's quirkily centrist mayor, Eric Adams, that's a bad way of describing him, had floated the idea of banning chocolate milk from city schools, then quickly abandoned the idea amid bipartisan criticism. I mean, duh. But okay, now, in the closing weeks of the campaign, Ms. Stefanik had come to the Mohawk Valley village of Fultonville, seizing a chance to simultaneously defend local businesses and stoke her constituents' age-old suspicions of big city liberals. So it could be, what do you think about that chocolate milk? No, that's crazy. I'm going to do whatever I can to make sure that never happens. I mean, the mayor has already abandoned that, but let's bury that idea forever. Could have been one way of doing it, but instead... We are seeing really bad ideas from the progressive left, she warned, adding, I've been proud to be the leader standing up for chocolate milk. Like that's maybe making a little bit too much of the issue, don't you think? Like Mr. Trump, Ms. Stefanik, who is 38, does not merely advocate policies. She casts herself as a warrior against the leftist forces scheming to take away the things that made America great. Chocolate milk. She speaks MAGA fluently, but with a touch of a foreign accent. No matter what the far left says, hashtag NY21, her district, will always stand for salute and honor our flag, which I thought you were talking about chocolate milk a second ago. But, all right. She tweeted in 2021, referring to her district, check out these beautiful American flags in the North Country. Like any convert, she makes up in zeal what she lacks in pedigree. When a reporter asked her last May about the new Ultra MAGA label President Biden had begun affixing to her party, she responded almost too eagerly. I am Ultra MAGA, she said in a tone of utter seriousness. I'm proud of it. Ms. Stefanik writes her own tweets and is effectively her own campaign manager, the first and often last word on messaging, scheduling, and strategy. She was always the smartest strategic mind in the room, said Anthony Pileggi, who worked on her first 2 campaigns. Somewhat unusually for a high-ranking lawmaker, she personally approves every piece of campaign direct mail, weighing in on the design, photos, and creative content, and sometimes writing the copy herself. Routine statements from her office or campaign often appear first on Breitbart, the alt-right Bible, which hypes them as exclusives. Since throwing in her lot with Mr. Trump, Ms. Stefanik has endorsed politicians like Sandy Smith, an unsuccessful House candidate in North Carolina, who called for the arrest and execution of those responsible for the, quote, fraud of Mr. Trump's defeat. In May, she hosted a fundraiser for George Santos, about whom there's still more news. We'll get to that later tomorrow, probably. A pro-Trump Republican, as you know, recently elected to a district in Queens and Long Island, who fabricated vast swaths of his resume and biography. A picture of the two still adorns Mr. Santos's Twitter profile, by the way. The same month, Ms. Stefanik attacked the White House, House Dems, and usual pedo grifters. That's the quote. For failing to address the nationwide infant formula shortage. Remember that one? A seeming allusion to the QAnon mythos, by the way. So in pursuit of that transient political issue, she's accusing people of being pedo grifters. Was it worth it? Isn't that a long-standing issue now? Aren't people still talking about the infant formula shortage? No, they are not. In 2021, as a surge of Haitian migrants sought to cross the border into Texas, she ran a series of Facebook ads warning that Mr. Biden would, quote, grant amnesty to 11 million illegal immigrants to, quote, overthrow our current electorate and create a permanent liberal majority in Washington. The ads echoed a racist conspiracy theory heavily promoted by Mr. Carlson, Tucker that is, about a supposed Democratic plot to replace the native-born electorate with illegal immigrants. The Great Replacement Theory. You might remember that. In New York, Ms. Stefanik has allied herself firmly with the Republican Party's clamorous Trump wing 2 weeks after a young white man killed 10 people at a supermarket this past May in a largely black neighborhood in Buffalo. Accusing his victims of seeking to ethnically replace my own people, Ms. Stefanik endorsed Carl Palladino, a developer and Trump friend running for Congress, who had suggested online that the massacre may have been a false flag operation meant to help Democrats revoke the Second Amendment. Within days of Ms. Stefanik's endorsement, audio surfaced of Mr. Palladino praising Adolf Hitler as the kind of leader we need today. The Congresswoman told HuffPost, remember, that his comment had been taken out of context. There's no context for that. Last January, she joined a New York Young Republican Club, a longtime redoubt of Rockefeller Republicanism recently taken over by MAGA enthusiasts. In May, the club announced a partnership with the youth wing of Austria's right-wing Freedom Party, because why not, proclaiming a shared interest in, quote, ending illegal immigration undertaken with the interests of eradicating the traditional people of a land. Guests at the club's annual holiday banquet in December included Peter Brimelow, founder of the nativist website VDare, and Jack Posobiec, the far right-wing commentator known for promoting the Pizzagate conspiracy theory. The club's president, Gavin Wax, views Stefanik's trajectory as almost inevitable. She really transformed, he said in an interview. There's no point in being a moderate Republican in New York anymore. And now the really creepy part, and we'll spend the rest of the show on this one. because we won't make it all the way through. This is a really long article. From Harvard to the Hill. This is the part that kind of creeps me out. Like the Ivy-educated Republican Senator Josh Hawley or Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, two other examples of doing the same thing, right? Ms. Stefanik has succeeded in the Trump era in part by turning on the kind of people and institutions that made her. That's important. The daughter of a prosperous Albany area plywood distributor, she arrived at Harvard a year after the September 11th attacks and immediately got involved with the university's Institute of Politics. At the institute's glass and brick building near the Charles River, a college freshman might brush elbows with a visiting senator, a Nobel Peace Prize winner, even a former president. We all wanted to be around power, and we all had to decide what we were going to do with that access, said Naomi Agis, A-G-E-S, a Harvard contemporary who went on to a career in environmental law. And that's important, environmental law. If only because it makes me think, isn't there anybody who goes to Harvard and gets that opportunity and gets involved in this kind of stuff because they want to help people anymore instead of, being near power? And the closest you get to that is the ones who graduate and become environmental lawyers as opposed to running for politics, running for office. And, then they end up maybe not really helping anybody at all. Sometimes yes, sometimes no, but environmental law can be just as annoying and wonkish and stupid and cloying in many ways. But anyway, I digress. We don't know anything about Naomi and what she's been doing. She may be great. The Institute tried, with mixed success, to weld the students' natural ambition, and I'd say unnatural at this point, to some notion of the public good. That's like the reason for having such an institute, you hope. Ms. Stefanik fell in easily with a mostly left-leaning crowd. 4 people who knew her at the time said she identified as a supporter of abortion and gay rights, though another college friend, Daniel Dunay, said in an email that she was pro-life then, just as she is now. Friends recall her zipping around Cambridge in a sporty BMW, an earnest and fun-loving young woman with an endearingly goofy side. She was sort of fascinated by the glamour of politics, said Claire Tucker, now a Democratic state lawmaker in Arkansas. Clark Tucker. A lot of people with the IOP, Institute of Politics, myself included, are sort of nerds with a reverence for American institutions. I mean, I have that, but still I find this gross. I would have said the same about her. Here we go, which is the most heartbreaking part of this. He added, she was running for something from the second she got there. A few weeks into her freshman year, she was picked to help run a weekly study group for a seminar led by Ted Sorensen, the former Kennedy speechwriter and confidant. After that, I was hooked, she later told a Harvard newsletter. No other institution in the world, she exulted, could match the Institute in terms of exposure and having a seat at the table. As a rising junior, she set out to run for the Institute's student presidency. Institute elections were hotly contested, of course, right? Pete Buttigieg was famous in their circle for his surprise victory 2 years earlier, but not particularly ideological. Hotly contested, but not particularly ideological, these elections are. Ms. Stefanik and a friend named David Caden, the polished son of a politically connected New York lawyer, decided to run together. Ms. Stefanik believed she should be at the top of the ticket, but in the end grudgingly agreed to be Mr. Caden's vice president, a concession that left her bitter years later, adopting a quasi-populist platform, giving all students, not just those in leadership, keys to the IOP student office. They won overwhelmingly. Later, a friend and Harvard alumna introduced Ms. Stefanik to her boss at the White House, an official who ran President George W. Bush's Domestic Policy Council. The day after graduation, she moved to Washington as his new assistant. I mean, that's all great, too. I think that's interesting, though, the part about she runs for the IOP student president as this other guy's running mate, and there's some question about who's at the top of the ticket, and then she grudgingly accepts being vice president and becomes bitter about it even years later. Actually, a little Aaron Burrish there, and he went on to be arrested and tried for treason. So, I'm not saying the same is going to happen to her, based solely on that election, but then based on her activities since then and the people she's aligning with and the fact that they've basically been committing treason for the last couple of years, it makes me wonder about that. But the Aaron Burr story came to mind as I was reading through this. So we had the same issue, running with Thomas Jefferson, but then saying, oh, actually, the fact that we both got the same number of electoral votes because we were kind of thought of as a vice presidential team, but they didn't do that back then, and it's a tie, and so maybe they meant me to be president. Aaron Burr, imagine that, rather than Thomas Jefferson. Oh, history would be very different. And maybe Thomas Jefferson would have gone southwest and committed treason instead. But he didn't. Anyway, the rest of this story is really kind of amazing. I don't know if we'll ever get back to it. The setup is incredible. By the way, she then moves back to Albany, ditches the BMW for a pickup truck, gets a job in her dad's plywood company, and tells everybody, I'm a small businesswoman. This after, I think, 10 years in electoral politics in Washington, D.C.
From networksradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, well, we'll get to that and sort it out. Perhaps we'll read a little bit more. In the meantime, it's time to turn things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, where he's got stories like this one. Adam Kinzinger fears for the nation if Trump is not charged with a crime for January 6th. I guess we all have that fear. Well, stay tuned for more next.